I have a prototype which is in last week's agenda, both the document and the pull request. So essentially, the way it operates is when an empty dir volume or potentially any other kind of volume wants to be created, it requests the project quota mechanism to impose a quota if that's possible. If it wishes not to impose a quota, but just to use it for determining the amount of storage, it can do that by simply requesting a very large quota that can't be exceeded, say in 64 max, for example. The project quota mechanism will identify an available project ID, both by looking at what project IDs are in use via the quota mechanism and by looking at etc proj ID and etc projects, which are the standard locations for this. At present, this only supports XFS. The mechanism is extensible, so it can support other types of file systems with quotas. Also, at present, it only supports empty dir volumes. It does not support other types of ephemeral storage, in particular log directories and writable layers. There was considerable discussion last week about the proper place to manage that, because those are really controlled by the runtime, not by the kubelet. My suggestion would be a quota component that could be vendored into container runtimes in addition. And I think that's basically where we stand at this point. I see this request to add read permissions to it, and I believe I've added it to the SIG Node group, but otherwise people are going to have to request access on an individual basis, because unfortunately I am not able to share it publicly. So I think at this point, I basically described the mechanism and be happy to open it for discussion.
I think the SIG Node team, SIG Node community want this feature for a while. And of course, the feature have the dependency on the newer kernel. So that's why we didn't development before, but this is kind of one of those resource management roadmap. So in your proposal, I noticed that you proposed a two approach. When it is monitoring this kind of things and driving invoke this through the Kubernetes directly. Another one is the goes through the container runtime. So which so build all those kind of the things library and delegate it to container runtime to use. I don't have the strong opinion for either way. So there are any other opinion suggestions?
Let me clarify. The second alternative I offered was for the kubelet to manage empty dirs, because the kubelet is what creates and maintains the empty dir volumes, and have the runtime manage the the volumes are maintained by the container runtime, namely log directories and writable layers. The code does flock the etc projects and etc proj IDs, so that if there are multiple processes using this code, they will be protected from each other and they won't overwrite each other.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, this is Tim Alclair. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
I just wanted to mention that there's a kind of a separate discussion that's being kicked off in SIG storage around how to handle ephemeral volumes for sandbox containers when we care more about the security. And some of that discussion has gone towards, maybe actually there should be a way for the runtime to opt into managing the ephemeral volumes, or just in all cases manage them as well.
Mm-hmm. That would serve. My general opinion is that whatever component is managing the particular volume is a component that should make the call to the quota code. Like I said, my preference would be for this code to be vendored so that it could be used by any component that wishes to use it. So yes, in that case, if that's done, then the quotas for empty dir volume should in fact be managed by the container runtime.
Tim, this is Derek. I'm sorry, Tim. Can you put a pointer to that discussion if there's actually a document I might have missed that was?
This is the same. This is the same. I haven't gotten into that level of detail with the SIG storage people.
Is there I guess, Tim, for the document or the topic you're talking about that's coming up in SIG storage, right? Is there anything that does discuss that right now that I could catch up on?
Yeah, there's a thread on the mailing list that I'll link in the agenda notes. I don't think there's a document yet. Okay.
I guess, Don, some of the other topics that came up during last week's discussion while many of you all were out were what to do when quota is exceeded. So I don't think we landed on a great situation with that. So if you did delegate to the container runtime to do enforcement as well as accounting, what did we want the enforcement behavior to be? And I think the concern I had was, like, it's possible that if we did very strict enforcement, that the container may never actually shut down, like if it can't write its last log message, or do graceful termination. So wasn't sure what everyone's, maybe as a broader group, thoughts would be around how to handle that, because obviously right now with the latent DU approach, we don't do much of anything, I guess. And you don't end up with this state where you have a bunch of pods that could potentially be stuck terminating. So we could handle that a variety of ways. Like, you could signal that the container is out of its allowed disk quota, and then we could extend the node controller to do some type of more aggressive action. But frankly, that makes me anxious. So I didn't know with the broader audience here if people had strong opinions, or if we did delegate it to the runtime, how big of an enforcement window we'd want, or if we would want two values, right? We'd have like a soft quota and a hard quota value, and the soft value would be, well, I don't know, I have to think through that, but I'd want a way to ensure that, like, pods don't get stuck terminating while trying to write something out.
Actually, my first reaction is we are only using the project quota for the monitoring. It's not enforcement. So in that cases, we can delegate it to the container runtime. Of course, that's the TBD, and to monitor the usage, all those kind of things. But still delegate to the Kubernetes resource management module to make the final decision. So to either evict it or take some action.
So my concern is that if the ephemeral storage is on particularly if it's on a fast storage device, pod may be able to write an enormous amount of data before the before the kubelet takes a look at what's going on. If it's an NVMe with an interval of minutes, something might be able to write 60 gigabytes or thereabouts before the kubelet catches on to what's happening.
Yeah, that's true. But
again, this mechanism can be used either way. That's a policy decision. That's a very simple policy decision that can be made at the time of applying the quota.
So I have the similar concern as the Derek, just like the container runtime, which don't understand all the policy or the scheme delegate either we delegate everything handed to the container runtime, or we delegate only partial to them and then set hard limit there. And if my concern it is if the one write cannot finish, and sometimes may even cause, based on my old experience, even may cause the whole node crash. So maybe kind of new project quota already don't have that problem. So it's developing better and don't have that problem, but that's kind of one cautious I have.
Well, I might point out that even without the use of quotas for enforcement, a write could fail to complete because the disk could run out of disk space. So the issue still exists today.
Yes, issues exist today, and also so that's why Kubernetes at the node level we introduce the soft threshold and hard threshold to prevent out of disk complete. You are also right, because for some faster storage, we end up like we saw some customer and write really fast. They do the code dump and take over the disk, complete disk very quickly. So we end up still have the problem, but that's the really rare cases. And also when we really examine it, is we didn't configure node while, because we allowed in that, if you look at those kind of things, we didn't configure the node very well, because we didn't configure, okay, how large your code dump can generate per user. So a lot of things we could do better job to prevent such a problem. And my concern it is in these cases, we basically purely rely on another purely rely on runtime, which is don't understand Kubernetes policy or Kubernetes policy. Then we hand over. So then when we into a problem, we may run into the whole node not really usable issue. That's major concern.
Okay.
And another thing it is I want to mention that, because no matter how we did that one, we end up might still overcommit the node with the space. So in that cases, we still rely on the Kubernetes to do the eviction. So out of disk detection and doing the eviction. So Kubernetes anyway have to do partial access problem. So that's why I think the project quota help us to reduce the overhead to detect of how much the space using and all those kind of things, and also monitoring more accurate. But at the same time, we want to Kubernetes to handle all the policy. So that's kind of my main. This is just my current out of my head, my current opinion on this.
Okay. Again, I mean that certainly is an option. Again, my recommendation is to use the quotas in an enforcing mode, perhaps setting the quota to be some multiple of the allowed ephemeral storage. But again, that's either way, that's a policy decision. Whatever this group decides, it's a very simple matter for me to. Indeed, it may not even require any changed code on my part. It's simply a matter of how the routines are called, the argument for the limit.
So I guess, Don, if we're talking about like Robert's probably going to be looking at trying to roll some aspects of this feature into a Cube 113 timeframe, right? So it seems like there's general consensus on the benefits of using Project Quota to improve our monitoring loop. And it seems that there's broader debate or policy issues we have to work through on how to handle the mechanism aspects. So maybe if we, as we look towards 113, Robert, if we divide this into like potentially 2 feature gates, and put our initial energies towards the improvements of the monitoring loop first.
I think that's a very sensible way to go about it. Yes.
And then I don't know if Yuju is with you today, Don, or not, but I think the other topic that we did want to dive, I don't know if we have the materials today, was if we do delegate to the container runtime, how do we pass that information down about how to appropriately delegate? And so I don't know, Robert, if you had updates in mind for the CRI. I don't know if it got updated in this doc or not. If not, we can do that discussion a separate time.
I think it might be best to have that discussion separately.
Okay.
But in any, I mean, if we're using it just for monitoring, then there's very little. Then the only thing we have to change in the runtime is to make the call into this code. So I guess we would need to vendor this in any event. But all we would need to do is change container runtime to make a call into this code to attempt to set a quota and to set basically an unlimited quota, and then just use it for monitoring. If we want to use it for enforcing, then we need to tell the runtime how much ephemeral space should be allowed, so the runtime can make the appropriate set the appropriate size in the call. But I think overall the proposal to make it two separate things, where basically the first phase would be just to use it for monitoring, and then we can defer the issue of enforcing either later or via a separate feature gate, I think makes eminent sense.
Yeah, sounds good to me. So how do you, Richard, did you have a question there? I saw you typing something.
Yeah, I was asking if ext4 would be supported. I read the doc and was talking mainly about XFS. One of the main reasons why we didn't start working on this probably a year back was that the Coda tools support for ext4 wasn't mature enough in upstream kernel. And so we didn't want to be the pioneer here and like start hitting too many issues with ext4. So is that like reasonably mature at this point?
So I've attempted to play around with the ext4 project quotas, and I've been hitting up against some issues. I've been unable, at least on my laptop, to make it accept the project quota. But the quotas are. The quotas are I have a provider mechanism, so that when the file system is identified, it delegates it off to an appropriate quota provider. So all we would have to do is write the provider for ext to go along with the provider for XFS, and we could do that.
So is that something that you are planning on working on directly, or are you open?
I would have no objection to working on that directly. I mean, I think it's a logical part of this project, even in a first phase. The XFS is essentially a proof of concept at this point, but I think it makes eminent sense to have it work on ext also.
I guess, what is the priority ordering for you this year? Obviously, at least from the Red Hat perspective, we're running on top of XFS, and we saw that as the initial use case driver. I'm not sure if you're saying like, say we handle this as a separate feature flag or a feature gate, like graduation of the feature to be used for monitoring, we need to support more than one file system type, or what type of stage rollout were you imagining there when you're bringing this up?
So, Derek, like, I mean, my basic thought process was that, like, it's either XFS if it's like a Red Hat-based distro, or if it's going to be ext4, and that's like predominantly those are basically predominant file systems that are being used. So, if we introduce a feature that only works on like one partial file system, then it's going to cause lots of cognitive dissonance for our users, and then we have to like explain it over and over. And so, it might be better for us to like not graduate this feature beyond experimental until we have support for both of those major file systems.
Again, once I figure out how to get the project quotas to apply to EXT, it'll be a very simple matter for me to add the EXT provider. The XFS provider just took me maybe a couple of days to write. The EXT one will probably be simpler just because I've already been through it. So I just have to figure out how to get the EXT file system to recognize the project quota and to accept that it's enabled. So I think it makes sense I think it makes perfect sense again to do both in the first phase.
Okay, so maybe as a next step, Robert, as we start to look towards Kube team planning, we get together a brief KEP that describes the changes around monitoring, and then the two targets here of XFS and X4. And then we can do the normal review flow through the KEP process. And then enforcement, we could probably treat that either in the same document or separately, but that seems like the right next step.
All right, that sounds good to me.
Just one minor question. Are you planning on like having a separate project ID for each and every entity that the kubelet tracks? And if so, like, how do you plan on checkpointing that overall mapping such that it persists across node reboots or across like kubelet restarts?
Okay, the quotas are stick. So in two ways. One is that the quotas are sticky to the file system. So they persist. The quotas persist over a reboot. I haven't actually done that per se, but I have stopped and restarted the kubelet, and the quotas are certainly persisting. Two is that I'm also storing the project IDs in etc projects and etc proj ID, which is the Linux standard location for storing those. So that information will also be persistent.
So are you then going to follow some sort of like naming schema for identifying what project IDs are assigned to what pod and like what entities for that pod?
I mean, thus far, I've basically just been using a proj ID of volume followed by the number, but it shouldn't be a big deal to come up with something different as long as that information is available to the project quota system.
Okay, yeah, the only thing that I want to call out is that like you probably want to spend a little more time on how you're going to persist the data, mainly that mapping, because that has caused issues in other areas in the past.
Okay, you mean in terms of the namings of the mappings, or in terms of how they're, or in terms of, I'm sorry, back up, in what regards?
I'm specifically referring to the mapping. If naming is one of the ways the mapping is achieved, then that's an implementation detail. Mm-hmm. I just want to understand like how one would understand what project IDs belong to what pods, and how can one go and introspect what's going on a node, and what project IDs in a given pod belong to a logging volume versus what belongs to a regular empty dir volume, or like say a scratch directory and so on.
Okay, that could be that. We have to work out the naming, but we do have to work out the appropriate naming. So etc projects stores a mapping of quota ID, well, quota number rather, to directory. If the directory, if it's possible to determine from the directory what it is, then etc projects will have that information, and the mapping will be visible. And if you use XFS quota, or you use the the other standard quota commands, you'll get that mapping that way. I could also come up with a similar kind of naming for Proj ID, but usually Proj IDs are typically fairly short.
Okay. I mean, I'll probably wait for your KEP to further understand this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? So maybe then we can we kind of agree in the SIG node and in the 1.13 time frame, and we want to work on the project quota and at least start from the monitoring and doing that development, and then we look into the implement detail and also policy detail and how we are going to do the enforcement and all those kind of things. Okay, I'm waiting for the cap.
All right.
So let's move to next item. And next one, it is someone proposal talk about the mentor and the mentees. So
this was me, Don. I guess I've been getting, we've had a number of folks who have privately requested an interest to try to pick up work in SIG Node, but feel like they might need help to have folks who are established in the community help shepherd that feature. And I think I was trying to think about a way that we can organize this across the whole community. Like plenty of folks come forward and say, I would like to see a particular feature in Kubernetes. And often we ask that those interested parties demonstrate that they want to be around as long-term maintainers of not just their one feature, but to help guide the node feature for a while. And so what I was trying to figure out a way, maybe we can figure out how to handle this, is for folks that express an interest, if we could more generally have a way, whether we do this on the mailing list or not, have a way of people saying, hey, I'm interested in being a long-term contributor to SIG Node. These are my feature interest areas. And if we could look towards, whether it's 113 or 114 planning, trying to figure out how we pair up those folks with the right reviewers and assignees so that we can scale the SIG a little bit more, rather than having like private, back channel conversations about how to enable this, just be very transparent on it. So I wasn't sure if folks that were on the call right now, feel that they have an interest or a particular passion on getting a particular topic explored in a future Cube release, similar to how Robert is doing right now in Project Quota. And if they could make themselves known, and then as we look to do 113 planning, we could see what we have with respect to reviewers to help mentor those folks. But I can't be the only one that thinks that this would be a nice area for us to grow. And so I was just wanting to get this out here. If we could keep a running list of people that are interested in joining the community more actively, and what we can do as a group here to help shepherd them along.
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea. I think at least I personally receive a lot of interest, want to join community, not just limited to the SIG Node, and they don't know how to participate. They also don't know how to, so there's a couple issues, and with the current non-structured process, they don't know how they grow themselves. So some people even mentioned to, some people from startup, they express their confusing, and they said they feel like they need a big company backup them, which is not true because this is the open source project. But the problem but in others hand, I feel they're feeling it is true because we need mental, just like what you mentioned, like the mental process and to grow those people. And So I have some thoughts, but I don't have the really concrete idea how to do this. One thing I think I can propose, like we could have some like the forum and or whatever people can register and say, oh, I joined the Kubernetes SIG Node community, which is our main audience. So then they just subscribe to say, oh, which area. So we normally to define our each release, we define our category, right? Area, like the SIG node. There have like the 5, I think include of the windows, we could even expand it to 6. So then people can express what they are interested and give something. And then we can also, based on the current existing member, and say, oh, people want to mentor other newcomer in which area. And so then we can start from there. And internally, like the Google have like the people, when people join the new team, they always have the team, like the mentor from their team, and also mentor cross team to understand the community leads or like the Google culture needs or something like that, which is really efficient, I think. If there's no other proposal, I will propose we start from there. If there's some other good proposal, and we could discuss in the community.
Yeah, so I guess I think that sounds like a great start. The other thing generally was just like if we could establish like a budget for the SIG on just how much time we want to shepherd towards like growing folks, because I think everyone recognizes that we're reviewer constrained, and so then there's like a competition of ideas to get your idea accepted and stuff. So maybe if folks aren't wanting to speak up on today's call, we can I can just put a general note out to the SIG Node mailing list saying, hey, new contributors or folks who might be more passively watching, if you are particularly interested in a topic in an area, please make yourself known. And then similarly, if you're interested in mentoring, I like the idea of the 5 areas that you identified that we generally have in our SIG planning, but just wanted to get something more transparent to the process here because, I want to make sure it looks like a fair process to everybody.
Yeah, sounds good idea.
Okay.
Any suggestion on this one?
If not, looks like well, thank you, Connor, and thanks, Patrick, as well. So please jump in on the mailing list when I send the note out, I guess. So I think those were the only 2 topics we had on today's agenda. Was there any more, Dawn?
No, this is 2. Any other things related to of the release? Because I believe today is the code phrase for 1.12. Any concern, anything? Patrick just mentioned that there's a queue of the 7PS just for Windows.
Yep. Yeah, and those are all ones that have been looked at by someone in SIG Windows, but still need an approve from an owner.
Yes.
Yeah, and to the last comment on mentor-mentee not from the same company, I agree. And so that's why I think the issue is that trying to get time reserved from mentors to mentor those outside of their company domain can be difficult, and just getting a clear budget or getting a clear project alignment is what helps there sometimes.
Yes. So I just want to clarify. Earlier, I just proposed that like the Google existing process, but it's not mean like same company provide this. I just think about the process we can apply to the SIG Node community. So then we could have like the people from the same area like you interested in same area, and then we have the existing reviewer pool, so we can find people to mentor. And at the same time, since you are the new people join Kubernetes project, and also like the SIG Node community maybe, and we can find some other areas, so you have some other things. So it's kind of like the distributed the workload, not to the one person, and then you have the at least the 2 person can cover your request, something like that.
Okay, well, I'll look to get a note sent out later this afternoon or tomorrow morning, depending on how afternoon looks. But it sounds like everyone is +1 on the general idea of tracking this more closely. And I guess last question, Dawn, did you record the meeting? I'm trying to get better at getting the upload, so I'll upload the meeting after today. Okay.
Yes, yes. Normally I remember to record. Yes.
Okay. All right, well, if there's no other topics, thanks everyone. We'll talk to y'all next week.
Thank you, bye.